What's something you've learned about David in this study that surprised you, or was different maybe than what you've always thought? What do you think, Linda?
Well, for me, I didn't really think of him as being coming from wealth and being, really a warrior and all. I had the Sunday school vision of him. He's a little shepherd boy. He's probably 15, and
Right, yeah, I think that is the Sunday school version. That 15 might be generous. I think when I was in Sunday school, I kind of probably had the idea that he was about 8 or 9 years old, and his little toy sling, and very much a different answer than that. Here's a man whose family trained for war, who had the 3 oldest sons already had followed Saul to battle. David was someone trained for war at an early age, so from a family of standing in Bethlehem. Enough to be known by the king. Is this not Saul? Is this not the son of Kish? Or excuse me, is this not the son of Jesse? That's very much a different sort of David than maybe we ran into in Sunday school. Good, that's a good one. Anybody else? Let's take a look then at getting into the action. We're in 1 Samuel chapter 17. We had an awful lot of lead up to get to the killing time, but we're at the killing time. So we're in 1 Samuel chapter 17, starting at verse 41. Anybody have page number in the Bibles?
447.
447 in the pew or in the black Bible. So remember, David had set the context. David came to the battle. He heard the Philistine creating or defying the armies of God, and he says, what did the king say would be done for me? Or done for the person who defeats this guy? Do you remember the 3 things that the king said he was going to do? Marriage to his daughter.
Family doesn't have to pay taxes.
Family's exempt from taxes. And this is one we usually forget. He promised to make him wealthy. Right? So riches, daughter, and to be excused from taxation. That's going to come up again. Those 3 things will come up again a little bit in the next chapter that I think we'll still get to today. And so David says, no one needs to be afraid of this guy. I fought the lion and the bear. I'll go fight this Philistine. And King Saul, who was Israel's giant refused to go fight Philistia's giant and instead was willing to send young David. And that's where we get to in verse 41. Meanwhile, the Philistine with his shield bearer in front of him kept coming closer to David. He looked David over and saw that he was only a boy, ruddy and handsome, and he despised him. He said to David, "Am I a dog that you come at me with sticks?" Why does he say that?
Because he didn't have a sword and stuff.
He didn't have a sword, but he had his sling and shepherd's staff, yes. "You come at me with sticks?" And the Philistine cursed David by his gods. "Come here," he said, "and I'll give your flesh to the birds of the air and the beasts of the field." David said to the Philistine, "You come against me with sword and spear and javelin, but I come against you in the name of the Lord Almighty, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied. This day the Lord will hand you over to me." It's interesting when you read that in the Hebrew. It could also mean, "This day the Lord has handed you over to me." It could be either one. Which one do you like better? Yeah, right? David was so certain of the Lord's victory that he says, no, God's already handed you over to me. Yeah, this is a done deal. "This day the Lord handed you over to me, and I will strike you down and cut off your head. Today I will give the carcasses of the Philistine army to the birds of the air and the beasts of the earth." Notice David is taking the trash talk up a level. Goliath said, I'm going to give your body. And David says, no, we're going to give this army's bodies. "The whole world will know that there is a God in Israel." Notice again how David is ramping up the issue here. He's saying the issue here is not a matter of arms, but a matter of gods, right? The Philistines had a god. Israel had a god. And the point that David was making here is this battle will show you that ours is true God and yours is no God at all. "All those gathered here will know that it is not by sword or spear that the Lord saves, for the battle is the Lord's, and he will give all of you into our hands." As the Philistine moved closer to attack him, David ran quickly to the battle line to meet him. Reaching into his bag and taking out a stone, he slung it and struck the Philistine on the forehead. The stone sank into his forehead, and he fell face down on the ground. So David triumphed over the Philistine with a sling and a stone. Without a sword in his hand, he struck down the Philistine and killed him. David ran and stood over him. He took hold of the Philistine's sword and drew it from the scabbard, and he killed him. After he killed him, he cut off his head with the sword. When the Philistines saw that their hero was dead, they turned and ran. And the men of Israel and Judah surged forward with a shout, pursued the Philistines to the entrance of Gath and to the gates of Ekron. Their dead were strewn along Sharaim, the road to Gath and Ekron. When the Israelites returned from chasing the Philistines, they plundered their camp. David took the Philistines' head and brought it to Jerusalem, and he put the Philistines' weapons in his own tent. They must have just been fun to look at. They were so big, right? Last week I said it's like when you beat a big boss in a video game and you get the special weapons, and this looks like a Monster Hunter size stuff, right? But later on, when he goes to find it, a priest will say to him, he asks the priest, "Do you have any weapons here?" He says, "Only the sword that you took from Goliath." And David's answer was, "There's none other like it." Yeah. Now, here's a flashback. Verse 55 to 58 is flashing back to before the battle, right? As Saul watched David going out to meet the Philistine, he said to Abner, commander of the army, "Abner, whose son is that young man?" Abner replied, "As surely as you live, O king, I don't know." The king said, "Find out whose son this young man is." As soon as David returned from killing the Philistine, Abner took him and brought him before Saul, with David still holding the Philistine's head. "Whose son are you, young man?" Saul asked him. David said, "I am the son of your servant, Jesse of Bethlehem." Okay. Little reminder again of some of the people we're going to be talking about today. In House Saul, current ruling dynasty. Saul is king. His cousin Abner is the commander of the army. His daughters, his oldest son is Jonathan, so here's the crown prince. And then his daughters that we'll be talking about as well today, Merab and Michael. All right, so what we're going to do now is give you a second to remember the timeline of where we're at. David here is fighting Goliath, and we're going to take a look at this section, and you can break up into whatever groups you want to talk about it. You can be a group of one if that's your pleasure. The first thing you're going to do is introduce yourselves, even if you know everybody's name. Just go ahead and say it, because they might have forgotten since last week. Or you might be seated in different places. But what I want you to think about is, again, you can be unhurried with this. This is one of the great stories of the Bible. And I want you to think about what strikes you as interesting in it. What's something you hadn't thought about before? What questions does it bring up, or rabbits that it makes you chase? because this is, again, one of the quintessential stories. So let's take, we'll probably take 7 to 8 minutes on that, maybe more. Ready, set, go.
Have you ever noticed
the actual battle started with 17 and versus 40. Right. So he's just attacking
you come against race or spirit?
and then they battle. Yeah. but I still, it is okay, I get that. Then you gotta carry it. I've been like, I'm the boss.
Let's start bringing it back together, wrapping stuff up. What was your conversation about? What rabbits did you chase? What did you find most interesting in this account? What questions did you have? Give me grace.
It's interesting that they kind of go out of order a couple times, where they have Saul talking about David, asking whose son is this, and then David bringing him back the head, but also before that talking about bringing the head to Jerusalem.
Okay, yeah.
Did they go out of order like that?
Yeah, so that's an interesting question. Discuss the options of taking Goliath's head to Jerusalem. It seems a little weird because it says David brought it to Jerusalem, and then during the flashback it says he's what a great image. He's standing there holding the head of Goliath in front of the king. The reason you have to maybe think about the options of taking Goliath's head to Jerusalem is the fact that Jerusalem at this point still was held by the Jebusites. Jerusalem would not be captured until David was king, and they went up the water shaft, captured the Jebusite city of Jerusalem, and after that it became known as the city of David. But right now, it was held by foreign power. So, we've got a couple of options of what does it mean that he took Goliath's head to Jerusalem. Can you think of what some of the options are?
Did he keep it with him until he captured Jerusalem?
That'd be one option. That this is proleptic. This is so right now he said that's saying he kept it with him. It was a pretty sweet souvenir on his mantle. And then eventually when he moved into Jerusalem, he brings the big skull with him. That's option one. The other option is
that standard practice of the day?
if they watch Conan the Barbarian, they drink out of people's skulls. But I'm not entirely sure. What do you think, Doug?
Sending a message to them?
Yeah, that would be the other option, that he shows up with the giant's head at the Jebusite city of Jerusalem and says, this is what the God of Israel is capable of, and will be coming for you soon. Yeah. Bob?
This may be completely irrelevant, but you mentioned the Jebusites and the control of Jerusalem. And I've just been reading a lot, and they talk about the order of the priest of Melchizedek. How's that tied into Jerusalem?
So the Melchizedek, so got to go back now 1,000 years. Abraham meets Melchizedek, who was called the priest of the Most High at Salem, which would have been Jerusalem. And so he was he was a believer in the one true God. We see in the New Testament that Jesus is called a priest in the order of Melchizedek because in the Old Testament, Melchizedek comes out of nowhere. He's got no beginning and he's got no end. In that way, the New Testament writers say Jesus is a priest like that. You don't hear he was the son of this father and he begot these sons and he lived these long and he died. He's a priest like Melchizedek. So what we would have seen here is that at least at that point, Melchizedek, the time of Melchizedek, Salem or Jerusalem would have been had people there who worshiped the true God, but in the 1,000 years that intervened, it became a Jebusite stronghold. Great question. Which of the two do you prefer? With the head stuff.
That he did it as a harbinger of what was to come.
A harbinger of what was to come. A great opportunity for PR. Yeah.
Well, that's one way of looking at it.
It does make it a little less macabre than keeping his head in your living room for a few years and then waiting for all the flesh to rot off and then you polish it up.
He's got the sheep in between all
Right.
this, right?
Exactly. What else did you talk about? What rabbits did you chase? What questions did you have? Doug?
Well, this has always been the case for me in this account, is David's unbelievable, unwavering confidence that he was going to me that's just, I can't fathom it.
Yeah.
It's gonna go his way.
Yeah, that's why I love it that I think that Hebrew word probably we take it as this day the Lord has given you into my hand. He's already done it. That's how confident he is. That's why he could go out there against this man of war in his full panoply carrying just a staff and a sling. I mean, he's like, no, this is because David framed the argument as it started out, if you remember in chapter 17, with Goliath coming out and insulting the army of Israel. And David says, nope, this is completely different. Now we're talking about a God thing. You're insulting God, the Lord of the armies, the God of the armies of heaven. Yeah, this, and your God? Yeah, it's not anything real. Ronald? And then.
But even though he had that confidence in God, and he knew it, he still did not tempt God. He brought 5 stones.
He did bring 5 stones. That's a really good point. Yeah, it's a really good point. Rachel.
I guess I don't understand how he could have all that confidence. I mean, God hadn't said, I'm going to do this for you, and just because God is on our side doesn't mean we're going to win every battle, not just literal battle, but, I mean, how did he know?
Yeah, I would not recommend this strategy for each of us as personal Christians. I guess I would go down to saying this is an example about how it said that the Spirit of the Lord came upon him and remained with David. It seems like, when the Spirit of the Lord, God had given David an outpouring of the Spirit in a way that seems different than so many of the other times that you see this happening, and that's the way I would probably answer it, is to say, the Spirit of the Lord gave David this confidence and let him know very specifically, you were in the right place and you're going to take care of this. Yeah, Scott.
But he also knew that he was going to be king, and he wasn't king yet. So
that's a great point. Yeah, God's promises. How can I be killed if I'm going to be king? It's kind of like the faith that Abraham had when he was going to kill his son Isaac as a sacrifice, right? In the New Testament, we hear that Abram was holding these 2 promises of God, that you're going to have descendants through Isaac. And now God says, go sacrifice Isaac. And the New Testament says, Abram figured that God must be able to raise the dead. So I'll kill him and God will raise him back up. Yeah, that's a good point, Scott. Thank you. Please, Linda.
Which of the stones, of the 5 stones in, is the one that really hit Goliath?
I think they make it sound like this was the first one, right? Yeah. So he was preparing, like Ronald said, but God took care of it on stone number 1.
In studying this, I wonder if that question should read, do you believe that David was at a disadvantage? Because that's just presuming that he had a disadvantage.
Yeah.
In essence, he didn't.
Yeah, in essence he
Physically,
did.
he did, but-
Yeah, right, exactly. So I put those questions on there because I read a book by Malcolm Gladwell a couple of years ago, and I like almost all of Malcolm Gladwell's work, but he was trying to make the point that the story of David, I don't know if you guys read Malcolm Gladwell stuff, but he's always trying to show things that are forgotten or people never really understood. And so he tried to make it seem as if David and Goliath that Goliath was the one at the disadvantage because he had some form of gigantism, which would have meant and then he went through a whole bunch of things, like if someone has gigantism, why, like his sight might have been affected or something like that. And here's David, and David is actually, is much more mobile, and he's able to attack at a distance and all these things. Sometimes people do that, but it just doesn't stand up to the biblical record, because what the biblical record says, like verse 50, the summary that the Bible gives is, he triumphed over the Philistine with a sling and a stone. Without a sword in his hand, he struck down the Philistine and killed him. The point there is what he didn't have, not what he had. Yeah, so I think the description shows us all the disadvantages David had, but as Maureen said there, when he said, this battle is the Lord's. So was there any disadvantage at all? Ronald?
I've seen that presentation, I didn't read the book, but I saw him do a presentation on it. And the thing that he's saying there is, he's taking a very skewed point of view. And I would only point to the interview that Arnold Schwarzenegger did when he was talking about working with Andre the Giant, and how that he got in a slight disagreement with him. And Andre the Giant reached and picked up Arnold Schwarzenegger up and set him up on a pedestal. Literally up on a pedestal and put him down, because he was that big and that powerful and that mobile. Yeah. You just watch his videos of him wrestling. It's amazing the stuff this giant guy can do. I can't even imagine going against someone like that in a fight.
Yeah.
He just kill you.
Exactly. Yeah.
Crush you.
Lanji, and then Debbie.
Goliath probably never even considered this guy was a threat. He was also overconfident. It was dead before the fight even started, really.
Exactly.
It wasn't nearly as good a fight as the video you showed between Achilles and Hector. That was fun to watch. This wasn't even a fight.
Yeah, how about that? That's what I was trying to get at with that. How does this narrative feel to you? I mean, there's all this lead up, and then it's just whack, down, dead, down. Yeah, it's almost the description of the action is it's so minimalistic, and that I think that's God's point, because they can talk all they want to, but when the battle is the Lord's, I mean, it's just this was not really like fighting a big boss where you work and work and work and respawn several times and get back in there, and this was just whack, dead. Debbie, and then Jennifer.
The prosperity gospel folks like to twist the story that you're always going to have victory. That God's wins.
So let's remind ourselves what prosperity gospel is. So prosperity gospels, there are some Christian churches that will teach that you should just expect health and wealth from God, and if you believe enough and have faith enough, you will be healthy, wealthy, and wise. And if you're not healthy, wealthy, or wise, it's a faith issue, and you just need to name it so you can claim it. And you need to. It's a terrible.
Give me more money.
Well, yeah, there's often that too. A lot of times the preacher has a private jet. But it's a terrible doctrine, because sometimes there are things in this world that are just broken that we have to just bear. You might have been given something to bear in your life from God that has nothing to do with your faith. But I worked with a family one time who prosperity gospel is kind of tied a little bit to the idea of faith healing. The idea that faith healers will say that God wants you to be better, and God has the power to make you better, so you just need to ask him to do it, and if you have faith strong enough, he will do it. The real problem with that is, what if you pray and God doesn't take it away? God never promised to fix everything on this side of the world, this side of heaven. He has promised to cure your cancer. He has promised to deal with your pain. He has promised to deal with your loss, just not here. But yeah, so exactly, Debbie. I think people that are into prosperity gospel will use this to say, see, if you just believe enough in the Lord, you're going to win. And I think that's not the lesson for us to take away from this. Bob, and then Jennifer.
I was just reading in the New Testament, and Jesus was responding to a question. He says, foxes have holes, birds have nests, the Lord has no place to lay his head. So the creator of the universe, through all things were made, never had a house, probably had clothes given to him, and yet we as his creatures are going to have wealth, health, and prosperity if we just ask for it.
Right. You'll,
Or
you'll,
dash away.
you'll hear that, and that's actually
You're
pretty,
funny.
it's pretty prevalent in this part of the country too. But yeah, so if you go to the Cathedral of the Holy Spirit, listen to Pastor Creflo Dollar, that's what he's going to tell you. It's just a lie, and it's really bad lie. Yeah. That's Jennifer.
TVN's filled with it.
My just question, my rabbit trail I was thinking of was, warfare after this with the champions. Did anybody try to emulate David after this point and bring slings to battle? And that's why they had armor on their heads by medieval times? Or was this such a unique thing that never happened again?
So sling warfare was very much a part, I think I have something in here on it. No, where'd it go? Let me go back one. Sling and stone was very much a normal part of warfare, both in the ancient Greek histories and in the ancient Near East. You also see it in the Bible that basically this was your archery before. Well, they had bow and arrow too, but this was kind of your what would you call that in the army? I guess your heavy artillery. You can strike with force from a distance, and you could strike infantry from a distance. So that was. But as far as someone deciding to drop their weapons, take off their helmet, and just pick up a sling and a stone, it doesn't seem like people said, you know what, I'm going to try that too.
And it was embedded in his head.
Yeah.
That probably didn't happen. But I mean,
Well,
for the army to see that and run, it must have been so
So the
mind-blowing.
embedded in his forehead tells us a couple of things, first of all. What do you learn about the battle from embedded in his forehead?
The force of the stone. Today, I guess a baseball pitcher 95 miles an hour with a baseball, and if they hit somebody, it's a lot of damage. So the force that's in that stone is slung.
Yeah, okay, the force of it, first of all, Jamie Grace, then Jim.
Surprised it didn't just crack a skull open.
Okay, yeah, and what does that mean, Jim?
David was very close when he slung the stone.
Okay, he might be. I do know one thing that it tells me about where David was, which goes against Malcolm Gladwell's idea that David had advantages because he was mobile. He was right in front of him. Yeah, it wasn't like he was running around and trying to hit him from the side and slinging it at his temple. The other thing is, if it hit and sunk in, that means that was just an absolutely perfect shot. I mean, isn't that the emphasis? You could kill a guy by, I don't know how many of you have ever thrown rocks at people, but I did once. I did once. It was the second time I got kicked out of Sunday school. It was in Minneapolis, Minnesota, and we had just learned the story of Stephen being stoned, and we had a little boy in our class whose name was Stephen, so we put him in a window. Then we were chucking rocks at him.
Sounds like boys.
Till Stephen's mom came out. That was the first time I got spanked by one of the ladies at church. That wasn't my mom. But yeah, I could imagine you slinging a stone and glancing it off the top of somebody's skull and still killing him. This is a perfect shot, actually.
So, I feel like other people also were thinking, how did he have such confidence in the decision or in his plan where we don't really have that? And I think it's because his world was a Christian world. His army was a Christian army. His nation was a Christian nation. So when he was going to battle, his battles for the Lord, even the things that we do, if we feel like our motivation is our faith, we're in a world full of weird laws and what's culturally acceptable now or what's considered rude or whatever, and it's like we don't have this power of group. We don't have our group behind us almost.
Yeah, that's a really good point, and it made me think of something though too, that everyone else in the army had the same context as David, the same group, the same culture, but there was one thing that was different about David, and that was the thing we're going to keep coming back to again and again, which was this great big old hairy faith that this guy had in the God of Israel. I mean, that is what distinguished him from everybody else. Yeah. Jamie.
One of the rabbits that we chased was that it sounds like when David took Goliath's head off, it was in one swing. Do you think it took a couple tries? Or
With him lying face down on the ground, I'd imagine he had to hack at it a bit. I mean, if you've ever butchered an animal, if it's lying on the ground, I mean, if he had his hand, hold him up. You could do that maybe in one swing, but no, my guess is he had to work at that. It's kind of a grisly story, isn't it?
Yeah.
Well, how could he even handle the sword? We hear how big Saul's armor was and David couldn't handle it. So how did he take the Philistine sword?
Adrenaline.
Even to pick it
Yep.
up must have been an effort.
Must have been an effort. Had to be something to see. When you see artist depictions of this, it's always interesting. Again, it looks like, am I getting the video game right, Monster Hunter, where your sword's like 10 feet long? It must have looked like that. Yeah.
Lots of adrenaline.
What I think is interesting is where did the shield bearer go? Because, he didn't do anything to deflect that stone. He must have
Yeah,
gotten out of the way.
the shield bearer did exactly what everybody else did. They took off and ran when they saw Goliath put down. Chris.
But we have that same confidence as David. I think that we need to just remember that.
Yeah, here's the thing. We've got the same confidence against even greater foe, right? We've got an enemy that's far scarier than Goliath, but, as the great Reformation hymn says, one little word can fell him. One little word, yeah. What irony do you see at the conclusion of this, the closing scene there with David, with Saul and his cousin Abner?
That Saul, again, apparently doesn't remember who David is and where he came from.
Doesn't remember who he is, even though this was a guy in his service. What else do you see in there that's ironic? Or maybe you don't need to deal with irony.
The fact that David was going to be his representative, that the king didn't know, who was going out to fight for him, because the consequences are that if the Philistine wins, now he's going to be subjugated to...
Oh, yeah. So you can absolutely make the assumption, what was Saul thinking?
Yeah.
There's no way, I don't even have to worry about knowing who this guy is yet, because there's no way he's going to be marrying my daughter. He's going out there to get slaughtered. Yep. Jim.
Well, I think it's interesting. He doesn't ask who it is. He says, whose son is he?
Yeah.
So he's asking, what family is he from?
Correct. And isn't that interesting? Because now we're going to get back to those, the house David, house Saul, right? Whose family is he from? There's some real irony there, because what he was going to find out is he's going to be from the family tree of Jesse, which we're going to hear an awful lot about in the Old Testament, right? Think of the irony there, that the once and future king are standing in the same room, one holding the head of the giant that Israel's giant was afraid to go out and fight. All of a sudden, you have all the players in geopolitics for Israel for the next maybe 10 years are gathered together in one room, and they had to just look at this guy and say, boy, he hits different, right? Immediately you're going to find out that chapter 18 is, which we're not going to be able to get to today, but we're going to find out that chapter 18, you see the effect that this had on everybody that was around King Saul, right? The chapter 18 is going to open up with the crown prince, basically loving David, making a best friend covenant with him, giving him his tunic and his weapons. You're going to see the people of Israel chanting out that Saul has slain his thousands and David his tens of thousands. And you're going to see everyone falling in love with David. In fact, if you read chapter 18 to get ready for next week, see if you can cut up how many people fall in love with David. The whole chapter is filled with it from one end to the other. And it's because what we're going to find out is, starting at this moment, the Bible's showing how readily apparent it was that the kingdom now was going to belong to the future king, not the one who currently sits. And that begins the great downward turn for Saul, and everything starts being an issue with him. Even like if you look at chapter 18, like the first time he gets really mad is verse 6 and 7. The men were returning home after David had killed the Philistine, and the women came out from all the towns of Israel to meet King Saul with singing and dancing, with joyful songs and tambourines, and they danced, they sang, Saul has slain his thousands, and David his tens of thousands. Do you think the women meant that as a slight? Why or why not?
I don't think they meant that. I think they were just saying, yeah, you guys work well together.
Okay, good. Josh thinks it was just a way to say that they work well together. Anybody else? What would argue that, what are the arguments that this is a slight or this isn't a slight? What do you think, Christelle?
Well, I think like, it comes back to the original battle. Why didn't Saul go out and meet the champion Goliath? Because he's a giant, he was the biggest, he's the leader, and you have this kid come out there. So why, you know, it is the slight, like, dude, you know, you, why wasn't it you?
Excellent. Holly?
Your tendency would be to kiss up to the person in charge, like that could do something for you, and you would, the tendency I would think would be to reverse that. Even if it wasn't true, you would be like, you know, Saul is fantastic and downplay David a little bit, but to raise up David and downplay Saul, like that just seems to be asking for trouble, which would.
Okay, yeah, I mean, think about it this way, they went out to meet whom?
The king.
The king, yeah, and what Holly's saying is, well, why wouldn't you be kissing up to the one you went out there to meet? Chris, and then Jamie.
Actually, I had another question, so.
Okay, then we'll do Jamie first.
Well, and I think the tendency for that time was if something happened like this to attribute it to the king. Like if you had a really good commander who went out and killed a lot of people, the tendency would be to associate that and say, oh, the king did that, and not, you know, praise up the commander.
Okay, and something else to keep in mind with this Hebrew poetry and how it works a little bit. First of all, they said Saul has slain his thousands, and David his tens of thousands. How many had David slain so far? One really big one, but one. Yeah, one. So they weren't talking about him slaying tens of thousands. Hebrew poetry a lot of times uses numbers where they introduce a number and then they do a census with it. So one thing I've asked of the Lord, two things I'll have done, or, you know, the Hebrewisms a lot of times would be thousands upon thousands and 10,000 times 10,000 you hear in Revelation. So this is really Hebrew poetry where they take the two largest numerical expressions in the language that they had there, and they put them in an ascensive nature. You know, Saul has slain his thousands and David his tens of thousands. Is not meant to be taken literally. But at the same point, so I don't think the ladies were intending to slight King Saul with the numbers, but maybe the slight that King Saul would feel is the fact that
They're singing about David.
they're singing about David at all. I mean, there aren't many kings in history that like to share glory. And it's so I don't think it's so much the numbers, but that David's being sung at all. And then you find out that Saul takes this very poorly. And it begins, so as much as everyone else in chapter 18 is falling in love with David, King Saul is developing a greater and greater hatred for him. Chris?
Before David and Goliath, it seemed like Saul knew who David was. And why is he asking who he is now?
Yeah, so think about it this way. Remember that when Saul had the evil spirit and they were looking for somebody to play the harp, and somebody goes, hey, I know a guy, he's trained for war, the Lord's with him, he's the son of Jesse in Bethlehem, and David comes and plays the harp for King Saul, and King Saul said, you know, I want David to be in my service. Eventually took him on as one of his armor bearers. But it seems as if it was part-time service. So like by the time when King Saul goes to war, David was going back and forth between court and Bethlehem. And it also seems as if David as an armor bearer was just one of many. It was not, so like David's eventual general, King, or Joab would eventually, the Bible says he has 10 armor bearers. I don't think it'd be hard to think that the king might have 20 or more. And what he was like, if we think about it in terms of the Middle Ages, he's like a squire from a small house that's nobility, but not anybody that the king would bother to remember, it seems.
How did he get the permission to even go to battle against Goliath?
So just all that happened was, you know, he was going there to bring provisions for his 3 older brothers who were serving with Saul's army. He heard this guy talking about it, and David just said, what are they going to do for the guy who does this? Because no one should be allowed to do that. And somebody, in the way that these things work in the world, went and told King Saul, hey, guess what? There's this guy out there who says he'll fight Goliath. And then they brought him there, and Saul goes, really? You're going to fight Goliath? David goes, absolutely. Yeah. Ashley, and then Jennifer.
Was it common in this time period for the king or the nobilities to actually fight? Because it seems like post Goliath, Saul would be regretting his decision, like, because he looks bad now, because this young man, this teenager went out and he's so much taller and bigger. So was it typical for the king to just sit back and let other people do the dirty work back then?
It seems very often that enough kings were killed in battle around this time that they were very much in the mix. Later on, you'll hear when a relative of Goliath, another giant, when they were in battle and King David, this guy decided to try to kill King David, and some of David's men came to his rescue and killed that giant. And then they said to David at this point, they said, no more, you're going to be in the front lines because we don't want the light of Israel to go out. And so at that point, then David was kind of a behind the lines commander, but a lot of them were frontline sort of people. Jennifer.
I was gonna say, Saul wanted to dress him in his clothing, which would not be normal.
Mm-hmm.
And, David's like, nope, and took it off. And so for Saul to pretend, I think he wanted to say, hey, I don't even know who that is. I didn't give him permission to go out there.
Well, it is interesting to say it that way because, one of the things we're going to find out in chapter 18 when Saul eventually gets around to giving one of his daughters in marriage to David, and David's response was, well, who am I? I'm a poor man. I can't pay the bride price. That's an implication of what? I'm sorry, that's a dumb question.
Yeah.
His point was, what three things were going to be done for the man who killed Goliath?
You're being a liar.
Yeah. Exempt from taxations, marry the king's daughter, and I'm going to make you wealthy. And now I can't pay a bride price because I'm a poor man?
Yeah.
King Saul? Yeah, so King
He's
Saul
not lived up to his agreements.
He was not keeping his
He's kind of
promises.
backing down like, I don't know who this kid was.
Yeah, you could make an argument for that because we also find out that his firstborn daughter was going to be married to King David, and this just was given to somebody else.
Right.
Yeah. Al.
I played a lot with a sling when I was a young boy, and it's a formidable weapon.
Yes, it is. I read, or not Thucydides. I don't have it on this slide, but I read the Romans developed a medical device that was meant to remove sling stones that were embedded in the bodies of their soldiers, because they would later on they kind of evolved to throwing lead projectiles, and sometimes would even make them shaped kind of like a bullet. And when you could sling a lead projectile, it'll just go through somebody. Yeah.
Well, I don't know what the range was, but I've always thought the range that David had was, and none of us know what the range was, but I'm guessing something like from me to you.
That'd be a good guess, I would think.
Or maybe even twice that far, but not 1,000 yards.
It was not 1,000 yards. People would make the argument that he was probably outside the range of a spear thrust, and maybe outside the range of a spear throw. But then again, because it seems like Goliath didn't have any chance at all to do anything, although it might be just because he was completely despising David, and I'm just going to walk up there and hack him apart.
And also, they were talking to one another.
Yes, they were not 1,000 yards apart. No, they were close enough to be able to yell at each other, so they could do the good trash talk. Mm-hmm. Let's close with prayer. Lord Jesus, we marvel at the faith that David had in you and your ability to win that battle, and we ask that you would increase our faith, Lord. Make us realize the confidence we can have that the Lord of the universe, the God of the armies, is on our side. Give us strength then, Lord, to face whatever adversities might come our way. And if it's in your wisdom that you allow such adversities to persevere, help us to bear them like the cross that you've given us, and know for certain that one day you will remove every cross in our life, and one day you'll make everything right that now is wrong. We ask it in your name. Amen. Thank you.